Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now. Greetings from Geneva. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting there today. The President Biden expected to confront Putin on several key issues that shot to the surface over the past several months, including the recent surge in high-profile cyber attacks. We'll preview this historic summit between the world's top economic powers. Middle East tension. Israel says overnight its military conducted airstrikes on compounds belonging to Hamas in Gaza, the first act of violence since a ceasefire was agreed upon just last month. What's behind this latest flare-up, and perhaps more importantly, is more fighting on the horizon? Critical vulnerability. Experts now say America's water supply could be the next target of a major cyber attack. One federal agency says at least half of the country's water utilities are now at high risk. How America's water supply turned into a prime target for hackers. And the fight for pride. State houses across the country are putting transgender Americans' health care and more on the agenda. We'll cover the state of trans rights as part of our June special series, Celebrating Pride, Past, Present, and Future. We want to get right to our top story this morning, of course, beginning in Geneva, Switzerland, where President Biden's highly anticipated and high-stakes summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin is now underway. Yeah, the two leaders are currently meeting, first posing for a handshake, and now those hours of meetings are underway, diving into them. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander has more on this historic summit from Geneva.
President Biden meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin this morning in Geneva. The two now facing off for hours of high-stakes negotiations for the first time. This is the venue for today's historic summit, Villa Lagrange, a Swiss estate on the banks of Lake Geneva. And that red carpet, that's where the presidents from both countries are going to be greeted this morning by the president of Switzerland. The White House saying it invited American media here because Russian press had been given a similar opportunity earlier. Senior White House officials say the meeting's expected to last 4 to 5 hours, though they say the two leaders are not expected to share a meal, and President Biden will never be alone with Putin. And afterward, a pair of separate solo news conferences. First Putin, then Biden. The White House vows the president will confront Putin over the recent surge in ransomware attacks that the U.S. blames on criminal Russian hackers. Putin, pressed by Keir Simmons, deflecting questions about his responsibility.
Mr. President, are you waging a cyber war against America?
Where is the evidence? Where is proof?
Despite years of aggressive behavior toward the U.S. and Europe, the Russian president insists he has not closed the door to cooperation.
We are willing to engage with international participants, including the United States. You are the ones who have refused to engage in joint work.
Putin also insisting he's open to a potential prisoner swap. Overnight, a plea from Trevor Reed, the former U.S. Marine sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison, hoping the talks between the two leaders could lead to his freedom.
Okay, I would say that I spent my whole life in the service of my country, and I would appreciate it if my country would help to bring me home in this difficult situation back to my family.
Republicans, meanwhile, argue President Biden has not been tough enough on Putin.
I'm concerned about what he's going to do here with Putin, because think about this. America is worse off because of Biden's weakness.
Still, former President Trump rarely criticized the Russian president, even publicly siding with him at their 2018 summit in Helsinki, saying he believed Putin's denial of 2016 election interference over his own intelligence officials.
My people came to me as they said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Let's now bring in former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Ambassador, good morning. Thank you for being here. Now, NBC News is reporting that you had a hand in helping President Biden prepare for this meeting. Of course, right now on everyone's mind is what's going on behind that closed door, this 2-on-2 session beginning this meeting today. Can you walk us through some of what you told him and some of what you expect might be happening?
Well, I can't walk you through what I told him because that was a private conversation with President Biden. But I have been in these meetings before when I served in the Obama administration. In fact, I was in the last meeting between Vice President Biden and Prime Minister Putin. From my experience, I think you need to be blunt with Mr. Putin. I think you need to try to engage on certain issues when you can find mutual interest. And here I think it's principally going to be about arms control. But you also have to agree to disagree and be very clear about those disagreements.
Mr. Ambassador, while we had you, we had to try, right? Ask what you might have told him. But we, of course, understand.
Yes, no, I understand. I understand.
Now, Mr. Ambassador, Biden has famously called President Putin a killer, most recently a worthy adversary. But then let's also talk about kind of some of what we've actually seen here today. It was negotiated that Putin would arrive first. He did. He did so on time. I heard you say in our special report he's notorious for surprises. We haven't seen any of those yet today. So what kind of tone do you think we might see in this particular conversation between two of the most powerful people on the planet, a meeting requested by our president?
Well, so far, I think the indications are that Putin wants to have a productive meeting so that when he goes to his press conference, he can say that they found some issues that they could agree on and that there's a process towards normalization. Now, I personally don't think there should be normalization with a leader that annexes territory of his neighbor, that props up dictators like he did with Mr. Assad, and that violated our sovereignty during the 2016 election and again in 2020. But that's a signal that that Putin will latch on to if, in fact, Biden says he wants a stable relationship with Vladimir Putin.
And Ambassador McFaul, usually in meetings like this, leaders will negotiate specific agreements or future actions. But we've heard a lot here from many people from the White House that we might not be able to expect any real deliverables. Do you think anything concrete will come out of today's summit that we might hear in either of those solo press conferences later today?
You know, I think it'll be thin. I don't think there's a big agenda here. They most certainly haven't negotiated substantive deliverables yet. But I'd look for two things. And one, we've already seen. There'll be a restoration of ambassadors in both capitals, right? They're both here in Geneva today, but I think they'll go back to Washington and Moscow respectively. And I wouldn't be surprised if you had some tangible progress on beginning strategic stability talks. That's a pretty low bar, by the way. We agreed to talk, not that we agreed to any kind of agreement, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see something along those lines by the end of the day.
A low bar with high stakes as we watch history this morning. Ambassador McFaul, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
Israeli jets carried out an air raid on Gaza overnight. It comes just weeks after a ceasefire was agreed upon by Israel's government and Hamas, and only days after the new Israeli government was sworn in. The military said the strikes were in response to fire balloons launched from Gaza. NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea joins us now from Tel Aviv. So, Kelly, it looks like there was a parade through East Jerusalem by far-right Israeli nationalists that provoked this particular round of violence. What's the latest there right now?
Well, Joe, tensions are definitely higher today in Israel. And in fact, there was an incident in the West Bank just a couple of hours ago. The Israeli Defense Force is saying that a Palestinian woman, tried to ram a couple of soldiers with her car, then got out of the car and attacked those soldiers with a knife. She was neutralized, and that's IDF code for killed. But it shows you just how much anger is on the ground here and how delicate the situation is. There are some reports in Al Arabiya today, unconfirmed reports, that the Egyptians have asked Hamas and Islamic Jihad to kind of take a step back, those two militant groups in Gaza, and that they have said that they don't want to escalate. So hopefully things will calm down. But again, a lot of anger on the ground, Joe.
Kelly, talking about that march yesterday, we heard the words "death to Arabs" being chanted by some at the parade. I know you spoke to those who took part in the march, some others. What are they saying?
Yeah, it was a pretty extremist crowd yesterday. We spoke to one young man, a 22-year-old who is a settler. He lives in the West Bank, and he came to Jerusalem for this march. Take a listen to what he said.
I'm here because this is our land, this is our country, and we're allowed to walk wherever we want, whenever we want, and that's why we're here. And we're not here because we hate ours, we're not here because we love ours, we're here because this is our land. That's the only reason.
And this, of course, is the core of the conflict, right? Israel seized Jerusalem as its undivided capital. The international community and, of course, Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem do not. They see it as occupied territory. Joe?
So what has been the Israeli government's reaction to all of this? And do they have any regrets that that parade was given permission to happen?
I mean, we haven't heard any regrets spoken. If there are any, these politicians have kept them to themselves. Of course, the Arab Party, part of this coalition, has said that this should not have happened in the first place. And actually, we spoke to some Arab politicians who were at Damascus Gate, where the march happened, before the march, and they talked to us about how they tried to get the government to cancel this before it happened. Take a listen.
Joint list twice, appealed to the government and appealed to Omer Barlev, the Minister of Interior Security, the new one, to prevent, to stop this march, this provocation, this aggression. They claim that this area is the capital of Israel. We are saying no, we do not recognize the annexation of East Jerusalem. This place, this city, Al-Quds al-Sharif, is occupied city.
The foreign minister, Yair Lapid, did condemn the extremist elements of this march, but that's as far as it went in terms of talking about what happened yesterday. And Joe, just to be clear, there are more controversial issues coming up. Always the issue of settlements is out there. And in less than a week, on Sunday, there's a Supreme Court hearing on Sheikh Jarrah and those forced evictions of Palestinian families there. Joe?
All right, a lot to cover from Tel Aviv. Kelly Kobe, I thank you so much.
We're seeing major progress for two of the states hit hardest by the coronavirus pandemic. New York and California have now lifted most of their coronavirus restrictions. But it comes as the CDC labels the Delta strain, first found in India, as a variant of concern. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer has the latest.
Savannah and Joe, good morning. California has fully reopened, but more than 15,000 businesses in Los Angeles alone have been forced to shutter because of the pandemic. And now there's new concerns about the Delta variant.
This morning, the Delta variant is causing higher levels of infection, more than tripling in just 2 weeks, and now making up nearly 10% of new COVID cases, with health experts cautioning the fall may bring a new wave of infections. The CDC has labeled the Delta strain a variant of concern amid mounting evidence it's more infectious and severe.
If you're not vaccinated, the Delta variant will spread in your community more quickly. It will take less exposure to get COVID-19.
While top doctors say being fully vaccinated will likely protect you from severe outcomes caused by the variant, only 44% of Americans are. The South, home to some of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. Mississippi, last, fully vaccinating just over 33% of its eligible population. In all, 25 states have completely inoculated less than 50% of people 12 and older. New York lit up as the governor drops nearly all COVID restrictions statewide, allowing businesses to open without capacity limits or social distancing requirements.
This is a momentous day, and we deserve it.
California's roaring return punctuated at Dodger Stadium.
Turner yanks it over.
With over 52,000 fans in the stand, making it the largest crowd at a professional sports league game in the U.S. since the start of the pandemic.
3, 2, 1.
The state's reopening day comes after a devastating 15 months. The governor, one of the last to lift restrictions.
The delay, how come?
We don't want to dream of regretting. And we're mindful that you can pull the plug a little bit early.
This morning, the stage is set for a COVID comeback, but it could be derailed by one of the most dangerous variants of the virus yet.
This morning, with that Delta variant circulating, there is a renewed push to increase inoculations. Savannah, Joe, back to you guys.
The FBI has a new warning about QAnon followers and the threats they pose to Homeland Security. Now that their prophecies are fizzling out, the fear is that some could resort to violence and potentially target Democratic lawmakers. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams reports.
Both the Attorney General and the Homeland Security Secretary say this new strategy is intended to get a better idea of potentially violent trends among domestic extremisms, but not to explore their political ideologies. The FBI says January's riot at the Capitol was a turning point for the conspiracy movement QAnon, with some followers dropping out, disappointed that the promises of the person behind it, known as Q, haven't come to pass. But others, the FBI says, may become so frustrated they turn more to violence, such as, quote, harming perceived members of the cabal, such as Democrats and other political opposition. The report says QAnon is also losing audience, with social media platforms blocking it. The Biden administration's new strategy on countering domestic terrorism calls for more cooperation with social media companies to spot terrorist trends. But the Homeland Security Secretary tells NBC News the government will not investigate any group over its beliefs, protected as free expression.
We are not targeting speech. We are not attacking speech. What we are focused on is violence.
The strategy calls for more investigators to better spot potential violence fueled by ethnic hatred, like 2019 shooting at a Texas Walmart. The Attorney General says the strategy encourages reporting behavior that could signal domestic terrorism.
The FBI reports that roughly 50% of our cases originate from tips and leads from law enforcement or private sector partners and private citizens.
When he was running for president, Joe Biden called for the creation of a domestic terrorism law that would give the government potentially more authority to investigate violent groups. But this new strategy does not call for such a law, saying more time should be spent trying to figure out how that would work. Savannah, Joe?
Temperatures are on the rise across the western U.S. A sweltering and potentially dangerous heat wave is expected to bring triple-digit heat and continue to tens of millions of people, with California and Texas already urging residents to conserve power. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky joins us now from Dallas. Morgan, good morning. Is it already hot there right now?
Savannah, it will be here in a few hours when that temperature starts kicking up. And what makes this heat wave even worse in the West is that a lot of these states are facing potentially the worst drought in 2 decades. Here in Texas, it's a bit of a power supply deja vu. Just months after millions went into the dark during a February freeze, there are now new concerns about how the state's power grid can handle this heat.
This morning, an extreme heat wave sweeping across the western United States.
It's definitely hotter this week. You can feel it.
Sizzling temperatures being felt from Texas all the way up to the Canadian border. And as temperatures soar, so is the demand for power.
Inside, air conditioning is usually all the way up. It's so hot.
The situation so dire in Texas and California, power grid operators urging residents to conserve power to avoid rolling blackouts. In Texas, the alert coming just months after a winter storm left more than 100 people dead and millions without power for days.
Like, oh no, here you go again. You know, we all hope it doesn't happen.
Pedro Garcia had a small generator that kept his power on during the February blackout. And he just bought a second to have as a backup.
And we decided that it was important enough to take a step, spend $1,500, have peace of mind, have good food, have cold air, live a normal life.
The heat wave's expected to last all week long. About 200 million people are projected to face temperatures over 90 degrees, 40 million facing triple digits.
We do have abnormally high temperatures forecast this week, and some records could be broken.
To the southwest, some desert areas could see temps as high as 127 degrees. In Utah, Salt Lake City had its hottest day of the year, hitting 104.
So we have 5 kids. We're probably going to stay in the house, to be honest, and not go out.
In western Colorado, the National Weather Service issuing the region's first ever excessive heat warning. And across California, the temperatures only heightening fears for drought and wildfires.
An extreme heat event and record drought conditions. You know, you're really setting a lot of people up for disaster when they need water and they don't have it.
And this week, ERCOT, the agency that manages the Texas power grid, urging Texans to continue to conserve power from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. through at least Friday. The agency saying that right now the grid is acting exactly as it was designed and intended. Savannah?
All right, Morgan, thank you so much, and try to stay cool. Let's now continue with this and get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns is with us. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Good morning, and I'll point out that Texas isn't even in the middle of this heat wave, and the fact that they're telling people to, conserve power is
Right.
That's not a good sign. I mean, it's not July and August in Texas where it's much hotter than it is right now. So that's a whole different story. So let's get into the areas that are in the extreme heat wave and when's the peak going to be and when does the relief kind of show up? So we had all-time record highs yesterday, Salt Lake City, all time, not just for the day. I mean, the hottest temperature ever recorded in the city, 107 in Salt Lake City. Billings was 108. Today, the heat breaks a little bit. Montana, Idaho, northern Nevada, northern Utah. Not as hot as yesterday, but we do not see that relief in the desert Southwest or in areas of California. So the arrow on the right shows you how much warmer it is than normal, about 10 to 15 degrees warmer than normal. Denver today, 17 degrees warmer than normal, and we should easily break that record high in Denver today. Not quite Salt Lake City. Phoenix, you'll be right there. Vegas should have break their record high for today. But tomorrow is the peak of the heat wave in the desert Southwest. Phoenix, 118. Look at Lake Havasu City, 121 degrees.
Wow.
Like that's typically like a temperature you see like in Death Valley. That's crazy stuff. And we should easily shatter the record in Sacramento, Lake Havasu City. Phoenix should shatter the record. So Thursday's kind of like the peak day. The heat wave continues this weekend, but it's not as intense. At least it drops a couple degrees. I don't even know do you notice the difference between 113 and 118? But yeah, we don't want to be out there in it anyways. And then finally, the other thing that we have to worry about, here it comes. The tropics heating up, a 90% chance we get development in the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing ever good happens when we have something develop in the Gulf of Mexico. There's land surrounding it in every direction, and this one's heading northwards. It doesn't look like this is going to turn into like a big hurricane or anything, but this one should bring up to 10 inches of rain possibly in areas near New Orleans, Mobile, and southern portions of Mississippi. So we'll watch that, guys, as we head towards the upcoming weekend, but keep that in mind for your Father's Day weekend plans along the northern Gulf Coast. It looks like a washout.
And thank you for that Father's Day reminder, Bill. I'm sure many people just wrote that down. All right, Bill, thanks so much. Coming up, experts are sounding the alarm on what could be the next target of a cyber attack here in the U.S.
Why our water supply is becoming a prime target for hackers. Next.
The Biden administration has called for a review of national cybersecurity policy after a wave of recent ransomware attacks. One area that's worrying some experts, America's water supply, which could be ripe for hacking. NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward joins us now from San Francisco. Jake, good morning. That was a terrifying headline that our water supply could be vulnerable. Tell us just how vulnerable it is. We've obviously seen this happen to our gas supply, meat supply. I mean, what could happen with our water?
Yeah, that's right. Good morning, Savannah. You know, it is very scary stuff. I mean, first of all, let's think a little bit about the broader context here. If you look at the place I'm in San Francisco at one of the many reservoirs built in the 1930s. That's when a lot of America first got its urban reservoir systems. Now, at that time, the people who built these systems had no idea that they'd be eventually trying to remote control these systems via an internet connection. And they certainly had no idea that criminal gangs might try to strike those systems from across the world. Well, it is really the interplay between these pretty ancient systems often built out of cast iron at a totally different era of the Industrial Revolution. You know, to that kind of contrast, trying to bolt on internet connections to that means that people weren't really thinking about what could eventually happen. We're now seeing across the country all sorts of water systems being touched, you know, in all sorts of ways by either ransomware gangs, by people just trying to cause mischief. And it really draws into question, Savannah, just how secure our water systems are going to be for all of us.
And are there any regions that are particularly vulnerable when we talk about this potential for a cyber attack?
You know, we have seen it in all sorts of places. We're talking about places like Ellsworth, Kansas, where an employee's credentials were used to get in. Oldsmar, Florida, where someone went in, actually moved a mouse remotely and could have changed the filtration system to let more caustic chemicals into the system if they had not been stopped. You know, really the only common thread here is that cyber criminals go after the open door. They look for places that are obviously not going to be prepared hard from this from a technical perspective. And the reason they go after water, Savannah, and this is really the terrible thing about the predatory nature of this stuff, is they know we can't do without it. Even 24 hours without running water in a city or without confidence in the safety of that water can bring a city to its knees. That's why they go after these sorts of systems.
All right, Jake, it's something I know you'll stay on it for us, especially when we hear about things like mouses moving remotely. I mean, this is scary stuff. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Let's look at what's making news around the world now this morning. NBC News correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome. Hi, Claudio. Good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. Well, let me start with some good news. Well, especially to Americans, even to you guys, because I know how much you wanted to travel on this side of the camera here in Rome. Well, now you can, because the European Union today finally agreed to add the United States to the list of safe travel list of countries. That means that within coming days, whoever is coming from the United States, including of course Americans, will be allowed to skip the quarantine if they can produce a proof that they'd either been vaccinated or they tested negative or that they fully recovered from COVID-19. So guys, I'll be waiting for you here in Rome finally now. Well, a second story is we're staying in Europe, of course, at the European Football Championship, where yesterday Greenpeace apparently scored an own goal when a stunt went terribly wrong. Now, a protester parachuted into a stadium in Munich, Germany, right before the France vs Germany game. Well, the problem is that the parachute got tangled into wires carrying an overhead camera. Well, the protester landed heavily on the pitch, while several spectators had to be taken to a hospital after they were hit by flying debris. Well, let's just stick to the European football, or rather soccer, championship, because Coca-Cola has lost $4 billion worth of market share after Cristiano Ronaldo removed a couple of bottles of the soft drink from a desk during a press conference. Now, Cristiano Ronaldo is arguably the world's most famous soccer player, followed by 300 million people on Instagram and countless more fans around the world. Basically, he sat at a press conference and he just shifted away 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, and then he showed a bottle of agua, he said, Portuguese for water, implying perhaps that that's what people should drink rather than Coca-Cola. Whatever his favorite drink is, whatever he's drinking is definitely working, because during the game he scored 2 goals.
There you go. All right, Claudio, thank you so much. Coming up, Mackenzie Scott, one of the world's richest people, and of course, former wife of Jeff Bezos, surprised hundreds of organizations and colleges with massive donations. We'll tell you where the big bucks are headed next. There was a different kind of bipartisan meetup in Washington last night. Politico first reported that Vice President Kamala Harris invited all 24 women of the Senate to her home for dinner Tuesday night. Dinners like this used to be common, but have become less frequent since 2016, when the bond between women running for office started to fracture due to campaign etiquette. One senator posted these pictures online and said the VP prepared homemade cheese puffs. Imagine that. Now, voters in Washington, D.C. filled out an unusual ballot yesterday. All 5 candidates in the race for a neighborhood advisory commissioner are inmates at the D.C. jail. NBC News correspondent Aaron Gilchrist spoke to the group about what the position means to them.
The D.C. jail sits across from a vibrant community in southeast Washington, the road between them separating them in more ways than one. Washington, D.C. is made up of 8 wards, each ward further divided into advisory neighborhood commissions and single-member districts. One of those communities will elect its first ever commissioner. The 5 candidates all locked up at the D.C. jail.
We can literally change the world from the inside out. We just need an opportunity to be able to sit down and express ourselves.
I believe the district is suffering from a lack of love.
I just want to bring, you know what I'm saying, my wisdom, my heart, to do what I can for my Washingtonians.
I pray that I affect someone in a positive way.
To learn more about the Advisory Neighborhood Commission and the role of a commissioner, we spoke with the D.C. Board of Elections.
The Advisory Neighborhood Commissions are really a very granular community level activity, and it's an opportunity for every citizen to have a very direct say in the affairs that are taking place in their city. And so they're able to amplify any concerns that they may have beyond quite literally the walls of the jail.
In 2019, the D.C. Council passed the Restore the Vote Act.
D.C. residents anywhere in the prison system who are convicted of either a felony or misdemeanor have the ability to cast a ballot. So it really brought to bear the opportunity that was open for this seat for a resident of D.C. jail to serve in the ANC.
The Communities Commissioner's Office has remained vacant since its creation in 2011. It represents the D.C. jail, the Harriet Tubman Women's Shelter, and a nearby Metro stop and apartment community, a new group of people living in the neighborhood who presented a welcomed challenge for the candidates.
The first way it has to begin with first seeing each other as neighbors. I think that's the biggest curve for us. And quite frankly, being able to run as a candidate who's currently incarcerated, that changed the nerve to seeing that everyone, whether they are detained or not, are actually residents of the District of Columbia.
For more than a year, inmates at the jail were under lockdown for 23 hours a day due to the pandemic, conditions that several candidates called out.
The laws and things that happen for individuals are draconian now. You know, the type of pressures and the type of incarceration that individuals are going through right now is just unimaginable.
An inmate at the D.C. jail will be elected commissioner, and regardless of who he is, the message to the incarcerated community remains the same.
No matter the circumstances, the crises, the dilemmas that you are in, that you can always think beyond the prison fence. Success should not be measured by how far a person making in life. Success should be measured by the obstacles and burdens we overcome.
Mackenzie Scott, philanthropist and ex-wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, is making news again with another massive donation. NBC News correspondent Natalie Morales has the details.
Hey, Joe and Savannah. Yeah, this is Mackenzie Scott's third donation since 2020, $2.7 billion. Now, that's enough to rival the contributions made by even the largest of foundations.
This morning, philanthropist Mackenzie Scott announcing a $2.7 billion no-strings-attached gift to 286 organizations. The 51-year-old former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos contributing alongside her new husband, lifelong educator Dan Jewett. The organizations on the receiving end, equity-oriented and nonprofit teams from refugee settlement groups to universities and minority communities.
That is the largest one-time contribution we've ever received as an organization. And my hand was shaking when I wrote it down. I actually wrote 1 million on a piece of paper in case I, forgot the amount.
The announcement comes after two other surprise donations in 2020. Forbes estimates Scott's wealth, roughly $60 billion, has continued to grow since divorcing Bezos in 2019. Scott expressed concern about the source of her wealth without referring to Amazon by name, writing she's attempting to give away a fortune that was enabled by systems in need of change. Bezos, currently listed by Forbes as the richest person in the world, recently named by ProPublica for paying no federal income taxes in 2007 or 2011, joining other multi-billionaires, including Elon Musk and George Soros, who paid little or no taxes compared to their massive wealth. Scott seeming to criticize that concentration of wealth, writing, "We are governed by a humbling belief that it would be better if disproportionate wealth were not concentrated in a small number of hands, and that the solutions are best designed and implemented by others." Not long after the split, Scott signing the Giving Pledge, first started by Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda Gates, promising to donate a majority of her wealth to philanthropic causes. Her husband, Jewett, also signing earlier this year. Scott and Bezos, who together share 4 kids, parted ways after one of the most expensive divorces in history.
And just to name some of the recipients, the University of Central Florida and the University of Texas at San Antonio will both be benefiting from Scott's latest donation. About $40 million expected to be given to each school, among so many other organizations very much hurting by COVID, getting this incredible gift. Guys?
All right, thanks, Nat. And coming up, we'll take you to a drive-through job fair in Mississippi as employers there clamor for talent in a hiring crisis like no other. What businesses are doing to attract would-be workers up next. It is time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you. CNBC's Bertha Coombs is with us today. Bertha, I love your Wednesday pink. Good morning.
Thank you. That's right. It's a thing, isn't it, Savannah?
It's a thing.
I keep forgetting. I guess
well, you dressed the part.
I've absorbed it. Anyway, more electric vehicle progress, or at least you've got these automakers speeding ahead. General Motors says it's going to boost spending on electric vehicles by 30% to $35 billion by the end of 2025. Reuters reports as part of that spending, GM will build 2 additional battery plants. GM CEO Mary Barra is expected to meet with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other top Democrats in Washington today to discuss EVs and vehicle emissions. Sony, meantime, is returning Cyberpunk 2077 to the PlayStation Store next week. The video game was pulled in December, and Sony offered players refunds, but because Cyberpunk 2077, she said, was full of bugs and many gamers experienced significant performance issues. Sony warns the game, which is made by an outside studio, still won't run completely smoothly on the PlayStation 4 console. And the skies may not be quite as bright this 4th of July. Phantom Fireworks, the nation's largest fireworks retailer, is urging customers to shop early as the industry faces a potential shortage due to a lag in global shipments. Fireworks sales boomed in 2020, see what I did there, as more families chose to put on their own shows during the pandemic after a lot of cities across the country canceled public displays. I got a feeling even though public displays are probably coming back this year, there are probably going to be a lot of folks who still want to do it in their own backyards. So I guess you better shop early.
Yeah, really. And hopefully we don't hear any of those disturbances like we did in the city last year. All right, Bertha, thank you so much. Mississippi joined 4 other states in ending federal pandemic unemployment payments this weekend in hopes of getting more people back in the workforce. Employers are saying they simply can't hire enough talent. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett went to a drive-through job fair in Batesville at a site previously used for vaccinations and testing to hear from employers and workers directly.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. I've reported from many parking lots over the last year and a half surrounded by tents like these, but usually we see COVID tests or vaccines happening here. In Mississippi, though, they're handing out jobs, cars able to roll up to 40 of these tents, businesses looking for employees. They can apply on site. Some of them are even conducting interviews on site. And this is the first opportunity after this past weekend where we saw Mississippi, one of 4 states, cancel those federal pandemic unemployment benefits in hopes that more workers would come out. And it really is a market beneficial for workers here today. I want you to hear from some people that were looking for jobs.
That's impressive. It literally shows that a lot of people are hiring now more than it was before. So that's a good thing. And they pay went up different too. So
now for everybody out here, it's kind of easy. Like if you can't find a job now, you're really just sitting at home being lazy. There's a lot of options that I think everybody would be satisfied with.
I worked for an attorney for 22 years, and he passed away with COVID back in January. And so I am in the job market. You know, that I started working there straight out of college, and that's the only job I've ever had. So I'm just new to all this and trying to, come to terms with what's going on and seeing what the job market's like. I haven't looked for a job in a long time. So I'm out just having fun, waving around. It's like we're in a parade. It's like, hey!
Now, we were initially curious if they were being pushed by the fact that those unemployment benefits were being canceled, but we actually found more people looking to take advantage of new opportunities, leaving their old jobs looking for better wages or better career growth opportunities, because it really is the workers' market right now. Employers telling me they're absolutely desperate to find employees ready to hike up wages or offer better incentives, and they had been blaming the unemployment benefits as a reason why they couldn't get employees. I wanted to hear from 2 employers that I spoke to about the struggles they've been facing throughout the pandemic.
People are expecting a higher wage coming back. And of course, when employers are saying we can't find people, you're gonna pay more to get someone if you have to.
We're just seeing a lot of increases this past year.
How does that combined with the pandemic, I know you kept working, but how does that impact your bottom line?
Very negatively. We have to be really creative to solve the problems, get more efficient at everything we're doing in the plant level, and pass some of those prices along to our customers. There's just no way we can't. So it's drastically affecting the bottom line. And labor probably more than anything, because if you're shorthanded, all of your top energy and your top people are going towards hiring. So all of their time, energy, and money is going to hiring instead of training and developing. And if you're doing that, you're just not efficient because your people are tied up in that.
Teresa, who you heard from there, said until this week, they'd only had 2 people interested in jobs since March. Her plant manager said, even though they're offering a variety of different types of positions with different types of expertise. And Dale also noted that because they're spending so much time looking for labor, they're spending less time actually on productivity. And ultimately, that cost carries down to the customer. So there's pressure on both sides to fill these jobs now that we're coming into this reopening phase here in Mississippi. Joe, Savannah.
A warning now for users of Peloton's popular exercise bikes and treadmills. Security experts have uncovered a flaw that could allow hackers to spy on riders. NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen explains how it works and how to protect your privacy in this exclusive report.
What's up, Peloton?
A possible bump in the road for Peloton Bike Plus and Tread users, especially in public spaces like gyms and hotels. Engineers at cybersecurity firm McAfee say they hacked into the software of the internet-connected Bike Plus using a USB drive loaded with malware.
There's actually an interactive map that tells you where every Peloton bike is located. So for a cyber criminal, they could actually use that to locate a bike, quickly and easily install this malicious software, and then go home and access it over the internet.
Once in, McAfee says they were able to install popular but fake apps, which could fool users into entering their usernames and passwords. They say they could even control the camera. Could you spy on riders?
Not only could you spy on riders, but maybe more importantly, their surroundings.
In a statement, Peloton says its popular Tread was also affected, but last week it, quote, addressed the issue with a mandatory software update. So far, the company says it has not received complaints from users. In this case, McAfee engineers had to physically access the bike to install the malware. But don't forget, hackers can also download malware when you click on a suspicious link or text.
A reminder, any device in your home that connects to the internet, a TV, appliance, or even a toy could be a way for hackers to get to your personal data. Cyber experts say turn on automatic software updates and consider security software.
All right, coming up, we continue our Celebrating Pride series with a report ahead of Joe's upcoming Trans America special.
Yeah, my conversations with some of the most prominent trans voices on the state of transgender rights and what's to come for the community next. Time for the latest in our month-long series celebrating Pride, past, present, and future. Today we're focusing on the progress the transgender community has made, breaking barriers in politics, entertainment, and more, but not without facing resistance, uphill legislative battles in state houses across the country.
The story of Pride begins with the uprising at the Stonewall Inn back in June of 1969. And the LGBTQ community fought back during a police raid. Transgender women of color played a huge role in that pivotal moment. Icons like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Now, 52 years later, a new generation of transgender trailblazers is making history.
I, Dr. Rachel Levine.
Dr. Rachel Levine became the first openly transgender federal official ever confirmed by the Senate.
To be nominated by the president and confirmed, I think, demonstrates how important equality and fairness is and that anything is possible.
On TV, the groundbreaking series Pose set a new bar for transgender representation in entertainment.
That glass hasn't shattered yet, but it's cracked. It's cracked. So that means there is some work being done.
Oscar-nominated actor Elliot Page recently came out as transgender, sharing his story with Oprah.
Being able to touch my chest and feel comfortable in my body for probably the first time.
Such high-profile stories are a reflection of the real world, where in towns big and small, teenagers like 16-year-old Phoenix are sharing their stories.
Finally, I've
kind of been able to express myself and finally kind of get some relief.
It evolved out of the cocoon into a beautiful butterfly.
But trans kids are also the focus of battles in state legislatures across the country. This year alone, more than 100 bills targeting the transgender community have been introduced in over 30 states. That includes laws restricting transgender participation in sports, passed in 7 states this year and 1 last year.
I can tell you this, in Florida, girls are going to play girls' sports and boys are going to play boys' sports.
Lawmakers who support the sports bans argue transgender girls have an unfair advantage. NBC News reached out to the 8 governors who signed those laws, asking if they could give us any examples of such an advantage in their states, but not a single one did.
Sir, can you give me one example of a transgender child trying to get an unfair advantage? Just one in your state. You signed a bill about it.
No, I can't really tell you one.
Mental health advocates worry the wave of legislation is marginalizing a community that already faces higher rates of depression and anxiety. A recent survey found more than half of transgender and non-binary youth have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year.
Let me be clear, the passing of these bills will harm trans lives.
Violence is a concern, too. So far in 2021, at least 28 transgender or gender nonconforming people have been murdered. Most are Black or Latinx. At this pace, it will be a record year.
Every time I walk out of the door, I'm afraid if I could make it back alive.
Yet you'll still find plenty of optimism. This year's 16-year-old Stella Keating testified before the Senate. She dreams of becoming America's first transgender president.
I just want to be treated as a normal kid because I'm not that different. I just have one small little detail about me that's slightly different than the majority of other teens, and that's just that I'm transgender.
And many of the laws passed are facing legal challenges. That does include a very controversial bill in Arkansas that prevents transgender minors from getting gender-affirming care like hormones and puberty blockers. It's something we've been covering extensively on this show here in the morning. There are 4 families in Arkansas that are now suing with the ACLU to challenge that law, which would take effect at the end of July, but we'll see what happens with the court battle. I actually spoke with all 4 of those families. That's going to be part of this special that we're doing called Trans America, taking a look at issues impacting the transgender community. And you can watch that tomorrow night right here at 8 p.m. Eastern on all your streaming platforms.
I cannot wait to watch the whole special. I mean, you have been doing some incredible conversations. I know that there's a lot more that we haven't even teased yet.
Lots. It's a lot of in-depth conversations and just a chance for people to share their stories and talk about what's important.
And talk to real people who are going through it, not just those big names, as you just did very well in that piece, but I know that's a big part of your special.
Exactly. That is important.
Yeah.
So, all right. Yeah. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.